Welcome to the Deep Blue on My Doorstep podcast. I'm Tracy Ainsworth from the University of New South Wales. In this podcast series, we will talk to marine experts about the marine environments that we have right on our doorsteps and what we can do to help conserve and protect these blue spaces. Hi, Duan. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're talking sea turtles with you. Everyone loves sea turtles, and lots of people are aware of the populations of sea turtles in places like the Great Barrier Reef, but your focus is much closer to some of our temperate waters in New South Wales and subtropical regions, which people might not know. We have turtles around here. So can you tell me, how big is the sea turtle population in some of these temperate places?
Yeah, 100%, Trace. I think when people think sea turtles, they think the tropics and they think Queensland. But I'm in Coffs Harbour here, which is mid-north coast of New South Wales, and I do a lot of surfing, a lot of diving, and I see a lot of turtles. And with the rescue and rehab work that we do here at the hospital, we'd get 40 or 50 a year that wash up on the beach and need care. So there's a bunch down here. They're all, they're all juvenile to sub-adult animals, predominantly, at least anyway. So we don't get the big breeding animals that you get up in Queensland. Saying that, actually, we're getting more and more of those females coming down to nest.
That's super interesting. Like, how far along the coast can people expect to see that they might come, face to face with a turtle?
Well, I think when you're out snorkeling and you've got, let me back up 2 secs. So yeah. What happens with sea turtles, and this should hopefully put it in context a little bit. So the female will come in and she'll lay her eggs on the beach. And then depending on the temperature of the sand, it'll take between 2 and 3 months. And that sand temperature will actually determine the sex of the offspring as well. So after that period, the little dudes, they emerge and they hit the water in a period called the swim frenzy, and they just take off. They go out through the nearshore environment and they hit pelagic currents and they drift around for 5 or 10 years out there. And then after that, that's called the lost years because no one knows a lot about them. And then when they're about 35, 40 centimetres long, they get recruited back into the nearshore environment. So when you're snorkeling, predominantly around here, they're the ones that we see. So we see those teenagers that have been kind of recruited back into this environment. And then they'll tend to hang here they've got a high level of site fidelity at that age. They hang around in the one spot until then they migrate up to breed and nest. So to answer your question, Getting back to the question, we see the little ones down here, and you'll see them as far south. I mean, we get them from Taree, Foster, Newcastle. They get a lot of them down in Port Stephens. Those little fellas down there. The bigger animals we don't have a lot of normally down here, but we do see them coming down here to nest.
Wow. So you're saying that there's teenage turtles with a local break that they're hanging out at?
That's it. They're the locals. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. That lost years is really interesting. We really don't know anything about what's happening to them between when they first hatch and before they come back to their local site.
Yeah, they're getting better now with kind of piecing it together using stuff like isotopes and that sort of stuff that wasn't around back in the 70s when that term was coined. Yeah. But yeah, still not a lot, and different critters do different things, So the green sea turtles will they'll duck off the coast of New South Wales or Queensland, wherever they've hatched, hit the East Australian current, very much like out of Nemo, and cruise down. But then they'll generally kick up on the inside of New Zealand, and they find these big sargassum beds out there, just floating debris, and just drift around and snack on stuff that lives in and around those sargassum beds.
Seriously, that's a long way.
Well, no, it gets better, yeah. So the loggerheads, they'll actually duck down the bottom of New Zealand and get spat out over South America, and then loop back up the coast, yeah.
That's massive swims.
Massive swim. You're talking about like a little 4-centimetre turtle, cruising out through big seas, hitting a current, drifting down south, and then doing the big loop.
Big swim back. That's really massive. I had no idea that they were going that far. And then did you say they come back to general area where they hatch from?
Yeah, so the critters at that age, when they get recruited back into that nearshore environment, I don't know whether or not that's where they hatched from. I know that they do return when they're nesting. They return back to the beaches where they hatched from, give or take. But in those teenage years, I think they're just hitting the coast and they're just getting their bearings. So they're just cruising around trying to find a good spot to eat that's a bit sheltered, and I think that's why with those little critters or the teenage critters, once they do find a spot that's suitable, they tend to hang there for a bit.
Wow, that's amazing. How long will they then stay at that local beach?
Well, if sexual maturity in these guys is around, say, 90 centimeters, 95 centimeters in length, or about 30 years of age, then they can hang in that area for, 10 or 15 years.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a really long time to be sitting in that one little local area. So people who are, like you say, going out and snorkeling off a headland or around an inlet and seeing turtles regularly, they're probably seeing those same turtles through their childhood, or, ones that were there as they were growing up or also growing up. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, just to qualify a little bit, but they hang in the one spot, but they may not hang in that one area then until they're ready to breed, and then they bail. But they do tend to hang in the one area for a good chunk of time, which is really interesting with these guys because it makes them really good sentinels. But in terms of looking at ecosystem health, these guys are hanging in the one spot. They're really good indicators.
Yeah, that's really interesting because your background's actually veterinary science. So you really have that lens of veterinary care and animal health that you see the marine environment through. So in terms of sea turtles staying in a place, and you mentioned sentinels, can we use the health of sea turtles as an indication for how healthy our marine neighbourhoods are, our local places are?
Yeah, that was the whole point of the PhD, was to try and do that, and I've failed miserably. So we haven't got any really good biomarkers. We haven't got any really good links between kind of environmental contaminants and causes of ill health. The problem with these guys, like I mentioned before, we might get 40 or 50 in a year.
Yeah.
With reptiles, they do everything slow. So they get sick slow, they get better slow. So it means the critters that we're getting in, they could have been sick for a month. The ocean, Trace, it's massive. A lot can happen in a month. You can drift a couple of 100 Ks from where you go crook or.
Yeah.
So we've had some positive results looking at nitrates and metals, but there are so many variables out there that it's hard to get a kind of a clear cause and effect, health compromise.
Yeah. Yeah, then you're right. That's a real problem with understanding what's happening in marine ecosystems, because for so many places, like I work in corals, I mean, we know there's a problem when they're dead, and that's an issue because once things are dying, then recovery and repair is so much longer than if we can get in and work out a problem before the animals start dying and fix the cause of the problem, rather than waiting for populations to come back. So do you think this is an area of research that needs a lot more help for sea turtles, is to work out what's really happening with them before they're stranding?
100%. So even though I'm at the end of my PhD, but I feel like I'm just at the beginning of a whole new kind of really cool area. So we've been using metabolomics with the guys up at Griffith Uni. And in terms of sensitivity and giving you a better look at the general health and the physiology of that animal, so much more sensitive than our traditional biomarkers. Otherwise we might get like a blood count and we can see that there's a higher level of white blood cells, which might indicate infection or inflammation. But you're like, it's a snapshot. Whereas the metabolomics and stuff give you the context, I guess. And so that's really cool. That's an area that we're just getting into at the moment.
Oh, nice. So the metabolomics, that's really looking at like a whole suite of markers at the same time. Is that from blood samples?
Yeah, correct. So we've done both. We do tissue, blood. But I don't really understand the method. It's some fancy nuclear resonant thing about bouncing molecules and stuff. But yeah, and it's non-destructive. So they can repeat the analysis on samples multiple times, and it gives you, it might spit out, I don't know, 1,000 metabolites, and then we just pick the ones that have got the biggest kind of spike, and then try and work out what it means.
Yep.
So
that's fantastic. I mean, I guess people hear a lot about dolphin strandings and things like that, and don't really know so much about sea turtle strandings. Your research has done a lot of post-mortem work and looking at what's causing these sea turtles to die along our coast. Have you got any insights into some of the biggest issues that are causing problems?
So once again, failed dismally on that. So we're actually, one of the papers we're doing at the moment is looking at all the critters that have come through the hospital over the last 10 years in the postmortems.
How many have you had come through your hospital?
We've had about 480 come through in the last 10 years. And about 200 of them we've done the postmortems on.
Yep.
We consistently say the same thing. which is these animals, they've got very kind of pale, watery muscles. They don't have a lot of fat. So green sea turtles are called green sea turtles because they eat grass, and the chlorophyll in the grass stains the fat. But what happens when you don't have a lot of fat and that concentration of the pigment stays, you get really black, watery fat. So black, watery fat and pale, watery muscles means that the animal's breaking down their own body reserves to feed themselves. So that's what we see. It's a condition called cachexia. But interestingly, these critters will often have a gut full of food.
Really?
Yeah, so the gut's inflamed. We see gastritis, gastroenteritis all the time.
Yeah.
We see this cachexia. So the animal's in like a negative caloric state with a gut full of food that, and parasitism. So just all non-specific chronic disease indicators,
Wow, that's really interesting. So they're eating, but they're still starving.
Well, I think what happens is they've eaten, and then something knocks them around. So they either, I mentioned nitrate before. One of the theories we were looking at was when you get a whole lot of nitrogen runoff into the marine environment, the seagrasses, the macroalgae sequester it away in an amino acid called arginine.
Yep.
And if you're a cow, like if you're a farmer and you over-fertilize your pasture, your cattle can get nitrate and nitrite poisoning. So we're like, wait a second, okay, we've got coastal eutrophication, we've got nitrogen, we've got gastritis, and we tried to make it all fit, and it didn't work really. So that was one thing we're looking at. But I think they've eaten and something knocks the gut around and shuts it down, and they're not assimilating those calories that are sitting in the gut, so they start breaking down fat and muscle.
Wow, that certainly does give some interesting indications about that connection between land and sea for some of the organisms and animals that are really iconic for our coast. You run a citizen science program, Save Our Sea Turtles, looking at rehabilitation of stranded sea turtles and doing these post-mortems. If people come across these diseased sea turtles on the coast, what should they do?
Call national parks, or call us or Google us. So I run the charity up here that does the rescue and research stuff, which is called Dolphin Marine Rescue. So we work closely with national parks. So either call national parks or call us or call Orca or call a care group. And then if it's in our area, they'll work out a way to get that critter into here. The Citizen Scientist Project is a cool one that was all about kind of trying to build capacity. So we're always running around picking up sea turtles and trying to talk to the public about it. So we thought, listen, why not run some training programs, get people registered as volunteers, and then they can run around and do the sea turtle rescues, and it frees me up a bit. But two, people get into it, you give them a bit of information, a bit of context, and they lap it up, and then they become kind of great ambassadors for the turtles.
Yeah, well, people are often really surprised as to what's actually living in the marine environments that they're like surfing in or walking near or hanging next to, and they just don't really know that these animals are out there and that they can actually be involved in helping them when they're sick. So that's awesome that they can get involved in these citizen science programs and really contribute to saving them. In terms of postmortems on turtles, what happens? It's gruesome, but it's interesting.
It is gruesome, and who are the best people to get involved are the kids.
Yeah.
So we run a little group called EcoGroms. And kids that are interested, they get a T-shirt. And then if we're going to do a turtle release, then they'll come in and they'll help us assess the turtle and be good to go. But then if we're going to do a post-mortem, they'll often come in as well. So adults, like my boss here, thinks it's gross. He thinks post-mortems are gross and the whole thing's disgusting. But you get a bunch of kids in, you give them some gloves, and they're elbow deep in intestines, before you can blink. And then we, you get under the microscope, and all of a sudden they've got this really engaging kind of experience, which is doing the post-mortem, and then you can link it back to so many different things, like we can do blood smears and talk about bloods, we can do a fecal float, so you get the poo. Kids love playing with poo. So, and you can learn a lot from the poo, so
I was going to say that that can tell you a lot about what the turtle's been through, right? Like what's caused its death, what's been exposed to, how far it's traveled, things like that. You can get that kind of information from your post-mortem.
Oh, 100%. And we often, everyone likes to see a sea turtle release or, whatever release, but we get more information out of an animal that dies, So a fresh carcass is gold. So we can look at the gross findings, and then we can look at, not gross as in yuck, like gross as in things that we can see.
Yeah.
And then we send tissue off, and we have a look at tissue changes, and then we can do metabolomic stuff. We can look at nitrogen and phosphorus ratios in the seagrass they've been eating, and heap of stuff. So the postmortems are awesome. We're actually doing the Australasian Symposium for sea turtles is coming up in September, and they've actually rigged up an AV set up there. So we're going to do a bunch of live postmortems, which will be interactive, so people around the world will be able to ask questions, and as we're cutting them up. So it should be a great educational tool.
And people will be hopefully able to watch that as well online.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the conveners are going to do with it afterwards, but I assume they'll make it available as a link, because it could be really cool.
Nice. So you mentioned Coffs Harbour and where you live. That's the Solitary Islands and Solitary Islands Marine Park, which probably people aren't aware that there's such an important marine park just off the coast of northern New South Wales. And you're part of the advisory committee for that marine park. Can you tell us a bit about how important that marine park is in general, but also to sea turtles?
Yeah, I think, I dive around here quite a bit, so you take it for granted. But when you start looking at the actual biodiversity in the Solitary Island Marine Park, it is just crazy. You can jump off a headland and see nudibranchs and plate corals and a sea turtle, and it's crazy. And we get the mixing of the tropical and temperate currents. It's a fantastic area to live in and to dive in. And that's, you mentioned before, I'm a vet, so I kind of came at this whole thing with a kind of a animal assessment kind of background.
Yeah.
But the more I dive and the more I'm exposed to the marine environment, I get a real buzz out of seeing the connections, like that interconnectivity out there.
Nice. It's amazing that there's that diversity and that meeting of, like you mentioned, you've got the tropical currents and the temperate currents meeting together there. So you do have that diversity of corals and invertebrates, and also, your sea turtles and some of the other more kind of temperate organisms and kelps and things like that you might not expect to see kind of living close together. That must really push the diversity of that system up to be something really, really interesting, particularly with all the different kinds of sea turtles that you get there as well.
Yeah, we've got a sea snake in care at the moment, like an elegant sea snake, which is it's a tropical species, and just got caught up in the current and spat in. Had whale sharks come through here early in the year.
No, really?
Yeah,
I had no idea you got whale sharks.
Yeah, not often.
Yeah,
but orcas. So you get those tropical species, and then you get orcas and great whites and all those kind of.
Wow, that's awesome. You're totally living in Nemo.
Yeah. Bruce is out there and Crush and all the. Yeah.
Nice. I don't know how keen I would be to see Bruce though.
No. I haven't come across a white yet when I've been diving, and I'm pretty happy that I haven't.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Hey, you grew up by the ocean, coastal town in New South Wales. You were a nipper. You said you're a surfer. You've spent much of your life in the ocean. And you've raised your kids with that same connection to place and to ocean. Is that what has inspired you to take your veterinary science into advocating for the health of marine neighbourhoods?
Yeah, 100%. I think, I've just been super lucky. To grow up where I did and end up living where I am and working in the field that I'm working in. And super lucky to be able to expose my kids to it as well. Like, we were diving on the weekend and they found their first nest of crayfish,
Oh, nice.
They were all too small, they didn't take any, whatever, but so super lucky. But in terms of advocacy, I think the real shame, a lot of the time, is there's a real disconnect between people and that marine environment. Like, if you're not out there in a wetsuit diving, often there's even here in Coffs, like there's a few educational resources where people can see what's out there, but not a lot. And the more you expose them to that, the more you can kind of advocate for the marine environment and educate them, and show them the kind of the complexities and the interconnectivity out there, the better. And one of the cool projects we're doing at the moment is called Sea Country Custodians. So we're working with Indigenous rangers to to give them a bit of the background on the biology and the management, like the health management of marine animals, and then combining it with some traditional owners who've got the kind of the cultural protocols and the historic significance of those species. And it's such a cool mix, like to be able to talk to these Indigenous guys that have been living in this area for the last 3-4 generations and get the cultural kind of component in there melded with the biology and the research and that sort of stuff has been a really cool project.
Yeah, it's lovely for people to see the longevity and I mean even the surprise that like a juvenile sea turtle, is spending its teenage years bouncing around the coast, and then to have that idea that awareness that these communities have been turning over right on our coast. We're more than just this sandy beach, that we've got this incredible diversity in the marine environment, and there's populations of people that have been connected to it for generation after generation after generation. I think there's a raising of awareness that we can have a greater connection to the marine environment by taking the time to look and understand and listen to what's been here for so long, even though it's new to us, right?
And that's the beauty. There's always something new, and there's something new, one, because there's like an infinite, interaction of relationships out there. But it's always new because it's changing as well. Like, and one of the cool things I started doing with the kids a year or so back was keeping like a marine diary. So if we went diving, they'd say, okay, I saw some purple coralline algae with a crayfish next to it. Oh, I saw a jewfish in June, and just trying to get that the context, I guess, like this is when the mullet come in and that's what they're eating, and so on and so forth. And yeah, it's cool.
Nice. That's a great idea. I mean, that's something that people can do, kids can do when they're down at Rocky Shores or at the beach. Themselves keep a record of what they see, where they see it, take photos of it if they can, upload them to some of the citizen science programs, and actually be part of bringing science into that connection as well.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the mix. Like if you can get kids that are engaged but they're collecting data in a way that can be used for like legit scientific outcomes, like that's the package, isn't it? That's gold. And then you sprinkle, that kind of cultural protocol and the respect for those kind of totemic species and stuff in there. Yeah,
it's magic.
Yeah, bang.
Nice. That's awesome. What do you think is the most important thing we have to do now for sea turtles? Like, what's the next step in understanding these strandings and making sure that future generations are coming across these teenage turtles and nesting turtles on our coastlines here in New South Wales?
I think the big thing at the moment with climate change is feminisation. So we've got the turtles that we see down here are part of the southern Great Barrier Reef stock of green sea turtles. But on the east coast, there's also a northern Great Barrier Reef stock of sea turtles. Yeah. So those ones up there, those turtles are producing predominantly female offspring. Yeah. So nesting success is okay. But that's going to have problems, 20 or 30 years time when they're trying to find a date, but the nests that we're getting down here in New South Wales, they're producing predominantly male offspring because the nests are cooler. So as long as we get the interaction between those two populations, and they've done the genetics and they know that these dudes are kind of cruising back up and mixing with the female critters. I mean, at the moment, population trends, like Southern Great Barrier Reef population trend for sea turtles is increasing. Yeah. So we're doing something right. We stopped harvesting. We took away a lot of the kind of anthropogenic threats and stresses to them. So number one, we need to make sure the boys down here mix with the girls up there. So that's number one. And number two, we need to get to the bottom of why we're getting sick turtles on the beach, because it's not like if we had 40 or 50 come in each year and they were, shark attack or even boat strike or line entanglement, we'd have an answer, you know. But we're getting disease, and we're getting disease where we don't know what's causing it, and that's the scary thing. So if we can't get a handle on that, we can't work out what's causing it, then we can't stop it.
Yeah, that's really interesting because that's a really important example of the combined impacts of local impacts and global impacts. Because, like I say, this population in New South Wales is obviously going to be really key to like future stocks of turtles along the whole coastline. And if they're being impacted by what we're doing locally, then that has a big implication, not just to our populations here, but also to the whole coastline of population. So that's really interesting that it's not just exciting that we've got sea turtles down here and we see them, but they're actually a really important population, and they're going to be really critical to the future of sea turtles along the whole coastline.
Yeah.
So it's really important that people start getting involved in some of those citizen science programs and reporting when they're seeing diseased turtles.
Yeah, so national parks have got a program going called Turtle Watch as well in northern New South Wales that is just designed to do that. It's to get data predominantly on nesting sea turtles. With our project, our citizen science one, we want to complement that and just get that data there. Like this animal nested here and the nest temperature was that, and then hopefully those critters, not only are they male, but they'll be healthy, and then they do their thing. But it's such a high neonatal mortality rate, so the more the merrier.
Yeah, can you explain that a bit more? What do you mean it's a high neonatal mortality rate?
Yeah, so the little dudes, when they hatch, they're 4 or 5 centimeters, and they've got to survive out in the ocean for 10 years or so, and everything wants to eat a 4 or 5 centimeter sea turtle that floats.
Tasty snack.
Yeah, so it's about 1 in 1,000, I think, make it through to adulthood. So if a female comes in and she lays 100 eggs on average per clutch, she might lay maybe 2 or 3 clutches a season, and then there might be 3 to 5 years or so between seasons. So she's producing, what's that? Say on average 250 eggs over 5 years, 50 eggs a year, and 1 in 1,000 make it through to adulthood. So
it's not good odds.
No. So the more the merrier.
Yeah. So losing those teenage ones to disease is a real problem.
Yeah, 100%. You hit the nail on the head. So once they get to that age, they are like the 1 in 1,000, because most things aren't going to eat. We get the odd turtle that's been chomped on, but they're pretty good at that age. They find their cracks to hide in. So by the time they get to those years, they've survived so many hurdles out there, and they're on the cusp of being kind of recruited into the breeding stock, So every time we get a teenage critter fixed up that's going to die and back out, and we might do 20 or 30 a year, and that's awesome for the population.
Nice. So you're finding when you're getting them live and bringing them in and looking after them for a while, they're bouncing back.
Yeah, I've been doing this year now 10 or 12 years, and when I first started, I was very confident that we're going to do this treatment and that treatment, and now we don't. We just give them TLC pretty much. So they come in, they get nice warm water, we rehydrate them if needed, monitor the bloods, and get them on a good plan of nutrition. Then they go good. We've had plenty kind of spotted again 3, 4, 5 years after release.
Nice.
It's nice.
That's fantastic. So, people out there seeing sea turtles washed in, get in contact with national parks, get involved in citizen science, and make sure that people like you can come and pick them up and rejuvenate them and get them back out into the wild.
Yeah, and we just have it like having a chat with people on the beach around a sea turtle is gold.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Duan, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I've learnt so much, and I'm going to keep more of an eye out for sea turtles as well. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Deep Blue On My Doorstep podcast. Don't forget to check out our website at events.unsw.edu.au, where you'll find all the photographs from this podcast series featuring the beautiful places that we've been discussing and the organisms found in these blue spaces.